My name is Matthew. Today is Saturday, February 14th, 2026, and I should not be here to tell you this. 4 days ago, on the evening of February 10th, I died. I am 34 years old, and for the last few years, I've stood on stages telling people about a God I thought I understood. If I'm being honest, before that Tuesday night, my Christianity was more about the routine than the relationship. I loved the lights, the influence, and the way the crowd looked at me while I spoke. I believed the doctrines, but I didn't always feel the heartbeat of the one I was talking about. I was successful, I was young, and I thought I had all the time in the world. I had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. I had the right clothes, the right words, and a growing following that made me feel I was truly doing something great for the kingdom. But looking back now, I can see that I was often more in love with the reflection of myself as a man of God than I was with God himself. It was a cold Tuesday night, but inside the sanctuary, the air was thick with heat and excitement. The stage was set exactly how I liked it. There was a massive TV screen behind me, glowing with high-definition graphics that changed with the points of my sermon. We had the best lighting and a sound system that made every word I spoke feel weighty and important. I remember standing in the wings, adjusting my sleeves, checking my hair in a small mirror, and feeling that familiar rush of adrenaline. I walked out to a roar of applause, a sea of faces looking up at me, waiting for me to give them something meaningful. I felt powerful. I felt untouchable. I was 34, in the prime of my life, and I believed I had decades of these nights ahead of me. I started the message with a joke, heard the laughter, and then transitioned into a passage about grace. I was speaking about the love of God, using all the right inflection and emotion, but inside I was already thinking about how well the service was going and how many people would share the clips online the next morning. About 20 minutes into the sermon, I reached a crescendo. I was pointing toward the screen behind me, showing a verse about the infinite mercy of Christ. I felt a sudden, strange flutter in my chest. At first, I thought it was just the caffeine or the heat of the stage lights, but then it happened. A sharp, searing heat exploded in the center of my chest, unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just pain, it was a total invasion of my body. My lungs suddenly refused to take in air. I tried to keep speaking, to finish the sentence, but the words died in my throat. My vision began to narrow, the edges of the room turning into a dark, swirling fog. I remember the weight of the microphone feeling like a lead bar in my hand. I watched it slip through my fingers in slow motion, and I heard the dull thud as it hit the floor, echoing through the speakers like a thunderclap. The floor seemed to tilt. I tried to reach out to the podium to steady myself, but my arms wouldn't move. My legs turned to water, and the world simply gave way. I saw the front row of people I knew, people I had served for years, stand up in unison, their faces contorted in horror and confusion. I saw my wife's face in the third row, her eyes wide, her hand covering her mouth. I wanted to tell her I was okay, but I couldn't even blink. As my body hit the stage, I felt a strange sensation of being squeezed out like water being pressed from a sponge. The last thing I saw was the ceiling lights of the church, blurring into a single blinding white star, and then the world went silent. In an instant, the pain was gone. The heavy, suffocating pressure in my chest vanished, replaced by a lightness I cannot describe. I found myself hovering in the air, looking down at the stage. It was the strangest thing I've ever experienced. I saw my own body lying there, face down, one arm tucked awkwardly under my chest. I saw the team of people rushing toward me, someone screaming for a doctor, someone else beginning to perform chest compressions. I watched them from above, but I felt no connection to that man on the floor. I felt no fear, no panic, and strangely no regret. I saw them frantically trying to bring me back, but I felt like I had finally stepped out of a heavy, rusted suit of armor that I had been wearing for 34 years. I was free. I noticed that the church didn't look the same from this perspective. I could see the hearts of the people below. I didn't see their clothes or their titles. I saw their spirits. Some were filled with genuine terror. Some were praying with a deep, quiet sincerity I had never noticed before, and others were just confused. But as I watched, the walls of the church began to fade. The ceiling didn't just disappear, it dissolved into a mist. The frantic sounds of the crowd grew distant, like a radio being turned down in another room. I felt a pull, a gentle but irresistible force drawing me away from the scene. I wasn't falling and I wasn't flying. I was simply moving into a new reality. The darkness that followed wasn't cold or empty. It was like a soft velvet curtain. I felt more awake in that darkness than I ever did in the sunlight of Earth. My mind was clear. All the worries I had about the church's budget, the social media numbers, and the opinions of others simply fell away. They didn't matter. They were smaller than dust. I realized in that moment how much energy I had wasted on things that had zero value in eternity. I was standing in a doorway between worlds, and for the first time in my life, I was completely silent. I wasn't trying to preach, I wasn't trying to lead, I was just being. And then the light began to appear. It wasn't a flicker in the distance. It was a glow that seemed to come from within the very fabric of the space I was in. It grew brighter and warmer, and I knew that whatever was on the other side of that light was what I had been searching for my entire life, even when I didn't know it. The light grew until it wasn't something I was looking at, but something I was part of. It was a golden, living warmth that seemed to wash away every lingering trace of the physical world. As I moved into it, I realized that I no longer felt the boundaries of my own skin. I wasn't just a man named Matthew who had collapsed on a stage. I was a soul, stripped of every title and every mask I had ever worn. I felt an incredible sense of relief. On Earth, I spent so much time trying to be somebody. I worked so hard to maintain a certain image of strength and holiness. But here in this light, all of that effort seemed ridiculous. There was no one to impress. There was only the truth of who I was, and surprisingly, that truth didn't feel heavy. It felt light, because it was being held by a love that was far bigger than my mistakes. I felt a presence before I saw a person. It was like standing near a massive fire on a cold night. You feel the heat and the power before you even look at the flames. Then the light seemed to take a shape. He was there, standing in the midst of the glow. I didn't see him with just my eyes. I felt him with every part of my existence. He wasn't some distant, stone-faced figure from an old painting. He was vibrant and real, more real than anything I had ever touched with my hands. When I looked at his face, I saw a reflection of everything I had ever hoped was true about God. His eyes were like deep wells of peace. There was no judgment in them, only an endless ancient understanding. He saw every corner of my heart, the parts I was proud of and the parts I had tried to hide from everyone, including myself. I fell to my knees, but it wasn't a movement of fear. It was the only natural response to being in the presence of the one who made me. I felt like a child who had finally found his way home after being lost in the dark for a long time. I couldn't speak. All the thousands of words I had preached from the pulpit suddenly seemed empty and small. I had talked about him for years, but I realized in that moment that I hadn't really known him. I had known facts about him, but I hadn't known his heart. Tears that weren't made of water seemed to flow from me. Tears of joy, of surrender, of pure relief. He reached out and placed a hand on my shoulder. The touch was like a wave of energy that settled every restless thought I had ever had. "Matthew," he said. His voice didn't just hit my ears, it resonated inside my chest. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, more melodic than any song, and more powerful than any storm. "You were so busy talking about me that you forgot to listen to me." His words weren't meant to hurt me. They were spoken with a gentle, fatherly correction that made me want to be better. I realized then that my life had been a flurry of noise and activity, but very little of it had been rooted in this deep, quiet communion. "Look at what was intended," he told me. He took my hand, and the world around us began to expand in a way that defied everything I knew about space and time. We weren't just standing in a white void. We were moving through a reality that was bursting with life. The first thing I noticed was the air. On Earth, we think of air as just something we breathe to survive. But here, the air was like liquid life. Every breath I took felt like it was filling me with joy and strength. It tasted like the freshest mountain breeze and felt like a warm embrace. It was as if the very atmosphere was made of the love of God. We stood on what looked like a vast, rolling meadow, but the grass wasn't just green. It was a shade of green that I had never seen before, vibrant, glowing, and alive. Each blade of grass seemed to be singing its own silent song of praise. There were flowers that didn't just grow. They radiated light in colors that don't exist in our world. I could see the tiny details of every petal, and it felt as though I could hear the rhythm of their growth. Everything was in perfect harmony. There was no decay, no wilting, no death. Life was overflowing from every inch of the landscape. In the distance, I saw a city that looked like it was carved out of pure sunlight. The buildings rose high into a sky that was a deep, shimmering violet, and every surface of the city glowed from within. It wasn't made of cold stone or steel. It looked like it was woven out of light and music. I could hear a faint, distant sound that I realized was the collective joy of everyone who lived there. It wasn't a loud or overwhelming noise, but a steady, beautiful hum of peace. It was the sound of a million hearts beating in perfect time with the Creator. As we moved closer to the city, I saw people. They were moving with a grace and a freedom that I had never seen on earth. There was no exhaustion in their steps, no weight in their shoulders. I saw groups of people talking and laughing, and I realized that they were communicating in a way that went far beyond words. They weren't just sharing information, they were sharing their very souls. There was no misunderstanding, no hidden agendas, and no fear of being judged. Every interaction was filled with a pure, unselfish kindness. I saw children playing near a stream of water that looked like liquid crystal, and their laughter was the purest thing I had ever heard. I saw a man and a woman sitting together under a tree that bore fruit that looked like jewels. They were simply looking at each other with a depth of love that made my heart ache. I knew, without being told, that on earth they might have been strangers or even enemies. But here, those divisions didn't exist. They were brothers and sisters in the truest sense of the word. There were no nationalities here, no political parties, no social classes. There was only the family of God, united by the love that flowed from the one standing beside me. Jesus looked at me, and I saw a glimmer of a smile on his face. "This is the design," he said. "This is how I meant for my children to live, in a world where love is as natural as breathing." I wanted to stay there forever. I wanted to run into that meadow, to walk through the streets of that glowing city, to join in the laughter of those people. I felt like I had finally found the place where I belonged. The peace was so thick it felt like I could reach out and touch it. There was no stress, no deadlines, no pressure to perform. I was just Matthew, and I was loved. But even as I soaked in the beauty of it all, I noticed a change in the atmosphere. The light around us didn't dim, but the focus of our vision began to shift. Jesus' face became serious, and a look of deep, ancient sorrow began to fill his eyes. He wasn't looking at the beauty of heaven anymore. He was looking towards something else, something that lay far below this perfect realm. He tightened his grip on my hand, and I felt a sudden sense of urgency. "You have seen what was intended," he whispered. "Now, you must see why my heart breaks." I felt the ground beneath us begin to fade. The shimmering city and the glowing meadows started to recede, not because they were disappearing, but because we were descending. The warmth of the heavenly air began to be replaced by a heaviness that I could feel in my spirit. I didn't want to go. I wanted to pull back, to stay in the light, but the authority in his presence was absolute. I knew that I was being shown these things for a reason, and that I had to be brave enough to look. The beauty of that heavenly city didn't just vanish. It began to feel like a distant memory as a different kind of vision took hold. Jesus didn't let go of my hand, and that was the only thing that kept me from being swallowed by the sudden weight of what I was seeing. On Earth, we see the news on our phones or on the big TV screens in our living rooms, and we can just turn it off when it gets to be too much. We can look away. But here, there was no looking away. I wasn't just watching a video of the world, I was feeling the pulse of its pain. It was like the air changed from that sweet, life-giving breath of heaven to a thick gray smoke that tasted like tears and iron. We were looking down at a city, but it wasn't the city of light I had just seen. This place was shattered. I could see the jagged remains of apartment buildings that used to be homes for thousands of people. In the streets below, there was a strange, terrifying sound, the constant hum of drones circling overhead. It was 2026, and the technology of war had become so efficient that it felt like death was being delivered by machines without any human heart behind them. I saw a mother huddled in a basement, her arms wrapped so tightly around her two small children that it looked like she was trying to pull them back inside her own body to keep them safe. There was no light in that basement, only the flickering red glow of fires burning in the distance. I felt the mother's fear. It wasn't just a thought in my head, it was a physical sensation in my chest. I felt her heart racing, her silent prayer for just one more hour of life, her desperate hope that the roof above them would hold. I saw the children's eyes, wide and hollowed out by things no child should ever understand. They weren't crying anymore because they had run out of tears days ago. They were just waiting. And as I looked at them, I felt a wave of sorrow from Jesus that was so heavy it nearly knocked me over. He wasn't just watching them, he was there in that basement with them. He was feeling every shiver of their cold bodies. Why? I whispered, the word feeling small and useless. Why is this happening? Jesus pointed toward the outskirts of the city, where men were standing behind long-range weapons. I could see their hearts too. They weren't filled with some grand sense of duty or justice. They were filled with a dark, sticky kind of pride. They had been told that the people in that city were others, that they were enemies, that they were less than human. I saw how easily they had been convinced that power was more important than life. They were following orders, but their souls were becoming like the rubble they were creating, broken and cold. They had forgotten that the children in those basements were made of the same breath and the same love as their own children at home. The vision shifted, and suddenly we were in a different part of the world. The sounds of bombs were gone, replaced by a silence that was even more haunting. I saw a vast, dry field where the ground was cracked like a broken mirror. A group of people was walking across it, their movements slow and heavy. They were moving toward a border, a line drawn in the dirt that someone had decided they weren't allowed to cross. I saw a man carrying a woman who was too weak to walk. He was looking at a group of soldiers on the other side of a tall wire fence. The soldiers had plenty of water and boxes of food stacked behind them, but they were standing with their backs turned, looking at their phones or talking to each other about things that didn't matter. I saw the hunger in that man's stomach. It wasn't just the "I missed lunch" kind of hunger we talk about. It was a deep, gnawing fire that was consuming him from inside out. He looked at the food behind the fence, and then he looked at the woman in his arms. There was enough food right there to save everyone in that field. But the people behind the fence had been told that if they shared, they might not have enough for themselves later. I saw the greed in their hearts, even though they didn't think of it as greed. They thought of it as security or looking out for their own. They had more than they could ever use, yet they were terrified of losing even a tiny bit of it. "Look closer, Matthew," Jesus said. I saw a mansion in a city far away from the dry field. Inside, there was a table spread with more food than 20 people could eat. There was laughter and expensive music playing. I saw people throwing away half-eaten plates of steak and cake, while just a few miles away, someone was boiling a piece of leather just to have something to chew on. The gap between the two worlds was so vast it felt like a canyon, and yet they were on the same planet, breathing the same air. The people in the mansion weren't bad people in the way the world defines it. They went to work, they loved their kids, and some of them even went to church on Sundays. But they had built a shell around their lives that kept the suffering of others out. They had convinced themselves that their comfort was a reward for their hard work, and that the suffering of the poor was just a complicated problem that someone else would eventually solve. I felt the coldness of that indifference. It was like a thick layer of ice over their spirits. They weren't choosing to be cruel, they were simply choosing not to see. And in that choice, they were losing the very thing that made them alive. Their souls were shrinking, becoming small and hard, while the people in the field were being crushed by the weight of being ignored. The sorrow I felt from Jesus grew even more intense. It wasn't a flash of anger, it was a lingering, aching hurt. It was the hurt of a father watching his children starve while his other children sat on piles of bread and argued about who owned the flour. He wasn't just sad for the hungry. He was sad for the rich too, because they were missing out on the joy of the city of light I had seen earlier. By holding on to their stuff, they were letting go of the only thing that actually lasts. Is there no one to help them? I asked, my voice shaking. Jesus didn't answer with words. Instead, the scene changed again, and I saw a building with a cross on top of it. It was a church, much like the one I had been standing in just a few days ago. The lights were bright, and the music was loud. People were standing with their hands raised, singing songs about how much they loved God. I saw the pastor on the stage, and for a second, I thought it was me. But it was someone else, though the expression was the same one I had worn for years. He was talking about blessings and increase. He was telling the people that God wanted them to be successful and happy. But as I looked into the hearts of the people in the pews, I saw something that terrified me. I saw walls. One person was looking at the woman sitting 3 rows away, thinking about how her clothes weren't modest enough and how she didn't belong in their church. Another man was fuming inside because the music was too loud and the leadership wasn't following the correct traditions. 2 families who had known each other for years were sitting on opposite sides of the room because of a disagreement about a political candidate that had happened months ago. They wouldn't even look at each other. "They are in a house built in my name," Jesus said, and his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "But my name is just a decoration on their walls. Their hearts are full of their own opinions, their own pride, and their own judgments." I saw a young man walk up to the door of that church. He was wearing old, dirty clothes, and his hair was a mess. He looked like he had been sleeping in his car. He stood at the glass doors, looking in at the warm, brightly lit sanctuary. He looked like he was searching for a lifeboat in a stormy sea. A man in a nice suit, one of the greeters, stepped out and told him that the service was almost over and that maybe he could come back on a day when they had a community meal. He didn't say it meanly. He said it with a fake smile, the kind people use when they want someone to go away without causing a scene. He watched the young man walk away into the cold night, and then he went back inside to join the final song about God's infinite love. I wanted to scream. I wanted to reach down and grab that greeter by the shoulders and tell him that the man he just sent away was the very person Jesus came for. I wanted to tell the people in the pews to stop singing and start looking at each other. But I couldn't do anything. I was just a witness to the tragedy of it all. I saw that the church, the place that was supposed to be the hospital for the broken, had become a country club for the comfortable. They were using their faith as a way to feel better about themselves, rather than a way to lose themselves in the service of others. The division was everywhere. I saw different churches in the same town that wouldn't even talk to each other because they disagreed on small points of theology that didn't matter in the light of eternity. They were like soldiers in the same army who were too busy fighting each other to notice that the world was burning down around them. They were so focused on being right that they had forgotten how to be good. They were so focused on the law that they had killed the spirit. The vision of the church didn't stop at the doors. It went deeper into the very thoughts of the people standing there with their Bibles tucked under their arms. Jesus showed me that the walls between these people weren't made of stone. They were made of a cold, hard pride that felt like a thick fog. I saw a woman in the 3rd row of a beautiful cathedral. She was praying, but her words weren't going up toward heaven. They were circling her own head like a shield. She was thanking God that she wasn't like the sinners she saw on the news. She was listing all the rules she had kept, all the money she had given, and all the people she had corrected for their wrong beliefs. I felt the weight of her heart, and it was so heavy and dry. It was like a piece of wood that had been left in the sun for too long. There was no room in her for the love I had seen in the heavenly city, because her heart was already full of herself. She had turned her faith into a ladder she was trying to climb to get away from the dirty world rather than a bridge to reach it. She was obsessed with being right, but she had no interest in being kind. Jesus looked at her, and I felt a pang of sorrow that was different from the others. It was the sorrow of a father whose child is standing right in front of him, but refuses to recognize his face. They have built a religion out of their own shadows, Jesus said. His voice was steady, but it carried a weight that made my spirit tremble. They used my words to justify the very things I died to end. Then the vision shifted again, moving away from the buildings and into the homes of the people living in 2026. I saw a different kind of suffering now, not the loud explosions of war or the sharp pains of hunger, but a quiet, suffocating loneliness. I saw a man sitting in a high-rise apartment in a massive city. The room was filled with the latest gadgets. There were glowing screens on every wall, and his phone was constantly buzzing with notifications. He had thousands of friends and followers online. People were liking his photos and commenting on his posts from all over the world. But as I looked into his soul, I saw a void so vast it felt like a black hole. He was surrounded by noise, but he was utterly alone. He spent his nights scrolling through images of other people's perfect lives, feeling a bitter sting of jealousy that he masked with more likes. He was terrified of being seen for who he truly was, a man who felt small, unloved, and meaningless. He used the screens as a barrier to keep people at a distance, afraid that if anyone got too close, they would see the cracks in his life. I saw millions of people just like him, all staring into the blue light of their devices, searching for a connection that they were too afraid to actually make in person. They were starving for a touch, for a real conversation, for someone to look them in the eye and say, "I see you and you matter." But instead, they were feeding on the digital scraps of strangers' approval. I saw how this digital world had become a factory for hate. People who would never say a mean word to a neighbor were typing things filled with venom to people they had never met. They felt safe behind their screens, letting their worst instincts run wild because there was no face-to-face love to hold them back. The sickness of the heart was spreading like a virus through these connections. I saw how people were being trained to see each other as categories rather than humans. They were liberals or conservatives, vaxxed or unvaxxed, them or us. The nuance of a human soul was being flattened into a headline. I saw how easily people were triggered into rage, how they craved the feeling of being offended because it gave them a sense of purpose. They were fighting ghosts on a screen while their actual families were sitting in the same room, ignored and neglected. "Look at the children, Matthew," Jesus whispered. I saw a young girl, maybe 12 years old, crying in her bedroom. She was looking at a photo of herself that she had edited to make her skin look smoother and her eyes look brighter. She had posted it an hour ago, and the comments were cruel. People were tearing her apart, mocking her appearance, telling her she was worthless. She believed every word. I saw the darkness of self-hatred begin to wrap around her heart like a vine, squeezing the life out of her. She didn't know that she was a masterpiece of the Creator. She didn't know that she was loved with a passion that reached across eternity. All she knew was the cold rejection of an algorithm. I felt the sheer exhaustion of the world. It was the exhaustion of trying to keep up, of trying to be enough, of trying to win a game that has no ending. I saw people working 3 jobs just to buy things they didn't need to impress people they didn't like. I saw parents so stressed about their children's success that they forgot to just sit on the floor and play with them. I saw the greed of the systems trickling down into the very marrow of people's lives, making them believe that if they weren't moving up, they were falling behind. The general suffering wasn't just in the big events. It was in the small, daily choices to choose fear over love. I saw a man walking past a homeless person on the street. For a split second, he felt a spark of compassion, a desire to help, but then a thought entered his mind. A thought he had been fed by the world around him. They'll just use it for drugs, or it's not my responsibility. He hardened his heart, looked down at his phone, and kept walking. I saw that spark of light inside him dim just a little bit more. Every time we ignore that pull toward love, we become a little more like the stone we are walking on. I saw hospitals filled with people whose bodies were failing because their spirits were broken. I saw an epidemic of anxiety that was vibrating through the air like a low-frequency hum. People were living in a constant state of emergency, their bodies flooded with stress because they felt like the world was on the brink of collapse. And in many ways it was, but it wasn't collapsing because of external threats. It was collapsing because the internal foundation of love had been eroded by decades of selfishness and pride. Jesus turned to me, and the sorrow in his eyes was almost more than I could bear. He wasn't just observing this, he was carrying it. Every mean comment, every cold shoulder, every act of greed was a weight he was holding. They are trying to build a world without the heart, he said. They believe they can solve their problems with more technology, more laws, and more walls, but you cannot fix a broken soul with a machine. You cannot heal a heart with a fence. The vision began to pull back, and I saw the earth as a whole. It didn't look like the beautiful blue marble we see in photos. It looked like it was covered in a web of dark, jagged lines. Each line was a conflict, a grudge, or a division. The web was getting tighter and tighter, choking the life out of the planet. I saw that the suffering Jesus warned about wasn't a punishment sent from the sky. It was the natural result of what happens when love is removed from the equation. If you stop watering a garden, it doesn't need a curse to die. It just dies. The urgency I felt from him was like a physical heat. It wasn't a threat of I will do this to you. It was a desperate plea of, stop doing this to yourselves. He was showing me that we were at the very edge of the cliff, and we were still arguing about who got to lead the way down. They must choose, he said, and his voice echoed like thunder across the dark web of the earth. The door is still open, but the shadows are growing long. The dark web of lines covering the earth seemed to pulse with a feverish heat, and as Jesus held my hand, we began to move closer to these lines, us as if we were diving into the very heart of the conflict. He wanted me to see the individual threads of this mess, to understand that the global suffering wasn't just a big, vague event, but a collection of billions of small, broken choices. The weight of it was suffocating, yet his presence remained a steady, cool breeze in the middle of a furnace. We stood inside a room that looked like a nerve center for a massive corporation. It was 2026, and the walls were covered in flowing streams of numbers and glowing maps. I saw a group of men and women sitting around a sleek table, their faces illuminated by the blue light of their tablets. They were talking about market share and growth. But Jesus allowed me to see through their words into their spirits. They weren't planning to hurt anyone directly. They weren't twirling mustaches like villains in a movie, but they were making decisions that would raise the price of medicine for millions of people just to ensure their own bonuses would be higher than the year before. I saw the spirit of greed, and it didn't look like gold. It looked like a thick, oily hunger that could never be satisfied. The more they had, the more terrified they were of not having enough. They were slaves to a number on a screen, and in their pursuit of that number, they were stepping on the faces of the poor without even realizing they were doing it. They think they are building a kingdom, Jesus said softly, but they are only building a tomb. I saw one man at the table. He was brilliant, successful, and admired by everyone in his field. But then the vision shifted, and I saw him at home. He was sitting in a room filled with expensive art, but he was staring at his phone, waiting for a like or a share to tell him he was still relevant. His children were in the other room, desperate for 10 minutes of his undivided attention, but he was too busy managing his brand. He was hoovering up the world's wealth, yet his own soul was starving for a single moment of honest, unscripted love. He had everything the world says you should want, but in the light of heaven, he was a beggar. Then, the scene shifted again, and we were standing in a dusty street in a town I didn't recognize. I saw two groups of people standing on opposite sides of a square. They were shouting at each other, their faces twisted with a rage that seemed to vibrate in the air. They were arguing about things that had happened decades ago, about who had been wronged first, and about whose God was the true God. I saw a young man in the crowd, his hands clenched into fists. He had been taught from the time he could walk that the people on the other side of that square were the reason for all his problems. He had been fed a diet of resentment and blame until his heart was like a piece of flint. He didn't see human beings across the way. He saw targets. He saw the enemy. I felt the heat of his anger, and it was so intense it felt like it could melt lead. But then Jesus showed me the other side. I saw a mother in the opposing group, holding a sign and screaming just as loudly. Her heart was also filled with flint. She had lost someone she loved to the violence of the past, and she had turned her grief into a weapon. Both sides were convinced they were the victims. Both sides were convinced they were the heroes of their own story. And in their certainty, they were preparing to destroy each other. "Love does not keep a record of wrongs," Jesus whispered, and the words felt like a cool rain falling on a forest fire. But they have turned their wrongs into their very identity. They define themselves by who they hate. I saw how this was happening in the church as well, just like he had shown me before, but even more clearly now. I saw two pastors on a digital broadcast debating a new law that had been passed in 2026. They were using verses like swords, trying to cut each other down in front of a live streaming audience of thousands. They weren't trying to find the truth. They were trying to win. They were trying to prove that their camp was the holiest. Below the screen, I saw the comments scrolling by. Thousands of people who called themselves followers of the Prince of Peace, calling each other names, questioning each other's salvation, and venting their spleens with a cruelty that was breathtaking. The world was watching them, and instead of seeing a light on a hill, they were seeing a pit of vipers. The very people who were supposed to be carrying the message of love were the ones spreading the most poison. They are fighting for the seat at the head of the table, Jesus said, while the table itself is being burned for fuel. I saw a vision of the earth's resources, the water, the soil, the air. In this year of 2026, the strain was visible. I saw massive machines tearing into the earth to find the minerals needed for more glowing screens and faster machines. I saw the waste, mountains of discarded plastic and electronics, piling up in countries where the people were too poor to say no. I saw the beauty of the creation being traded for convenience. It wasn't that the people were trying to destroy the planet, they just didn't care enough to stop. They were living for the now, for the instant gratification of a delivery at their door or a new gadget in their hand. I saw the spirit of waste, a hollow, echoing feeling that told people they would finally be happy if they just had the next thing. But the next thing never brought peace. It only brought a need for the thing after that. They are trying to fill an infinite hole with finite things, Jesus said. They have forgotten that they were made for me and only I can fill that space. I felt the general suffering of the world like a heavy, gray blanket. It was the suffering of the woman who felt she had to change her face to be loved. It was the suffering of the man who felt he had to lie to keep his job. It was the suffering of the child who felt she had to be perfect to get her parents' attention. It was a world of masks where everyone was pretending to be okay while their souls were screaming for help. Jesus stopped and looked at me. His eyes were so full of compassion that I felt my own heart start to break. He wasn't looking at the world with a sense of, "I told you so." He was looking at it like a mother looks at a child who is wandering into traffic. He was desperate for them to turn around. "They think the answer is more information," he told me. "They think the answer is more power, or more money, or more rules. But the answer has been the same since the beginning. It is the only thing that can dissolve the flint in their hearts. It is the only thing that can wash away the oily hunger of greed." He paused, and the entire vision of the suffering world seemed to go quiet, as if it were holding its breath. "It is love," he said. "Not the kind they talk about in their songs, which is just a feeling that comes and goes. But my love, a love that gives without asking, a love that forgives before it is asked, a love that sees the enemy and sees a brother who is lost." The urgency in his voice was growing. I could feel the time on earth ticking away like a heartbeat that was skipping. The web of dark lines was tightening. "Matthew," he said, calling me by name again, "you must see what happens when the choice is not made. You must see the end of the path of shadows." The vision of the world shifted again, but this time it wasn't a single city or a specific battlefield. It was as if Jesus was letting me see the very atmosphere of the earth in this year of 2026. I saw a thick, heavy layer of gray fog that seemed to cling to every house, every office building, and every person. It wasn't smoke and it wasn't weather. It was the collective weight of millions of hearts that had given up on hope. It was the general suffering of a world that had tried to find peace in everything except the one who created it. We stood on a typical street in a quiet neighborhood. On the surface, it looked peaceful. The lawns were trimmed and the cars were parked neatly in the driveways. But Jesus touched my eyes, and I could see through the walls of the houses. I saw a man sitting in his living room, surrounded by beautiful furniture and a large screen glowing with stock market updates. He had worked his whole life to reach this level of success, but as I looked at his spirit, I saw a desert. He was terrified. He was terrified of losing what he had, terrified of getting old, and terrified that his life actually meant nothing. He was successful in the eyes of his neighbors, but he was dying of thirst for a kind of love that he didn't know how to ask for. In the house next door, I saw a woman crying quietly in her kitchen. She had everything she was told would make her happy, but she felt like a ghost in her own home. Her children were in their rooms, lost in the digital worlds of their phones, and her husband was in the garage, hiding from the silence of their marriage. They were all under the same roof, but they were miles apart. I felt the coldness of their isolation. It wasn't that they hated each other. It was just that they had forgotten how to be vulnerable. They had replaced honest conversation with polished social media posts, and now they didn't know how to reach across the table and just hold a hand. "This is the sickness that no medicine can cure," Jesus whispered. His voice was so gentle, but it carried a sorrow that made me want to fall to the ground. "They are starving for my presence, but they are trying to fill the hunger with noise." I saw the workplace of 2026, where people were treated like parts of a machine. I saw a young man sitting at a desk, his eyes red from staring at numbers for 12 hours straight. He was part of a system that valued his output more than his soul. He was told he was essential, but he felt completely invisible. I saw the greed of the owners trickling down, creating a culture of fear, where everyone was competing for a crumb of security. There was no joy in the labor, no sense of purpose. It was just a race toward a finish line that kept moving further away. Then, Jesus showed me the end of this path. He showed me what happens when this gray fog of isolation and greed finally wins. I saw a vision of the world where the dark lines I had seen before had finally pulled everything apart. It wasn't a world of fire and brimstone. It was a world of absolute cold. I saw people walking past each other on the street without a single glance. I saw a world where help was a word that no one understood anymore. I saw a world where the only thing that mattered was survival, and because of that, no one was actually living. It was a world without the heart. I saw a playground where the equipment was rusted and still. There were no children playing because the parents were too afraid to let them out. I saw schools that looked more like prisons, where the focus was on control rather than growth. I saw a society that had built so many walls and so many security systems that they had successfully locked themselves in a cage of their own making. They were safe, but they were hollow. When love is removed, Jesus said, and his voice echoed like a bell in the gray silence, life itself begins to fade. Without me, the colors of the soul go dark. I saw a vision of the church in this dark future. The buildings were still there, some of them even larger and more impressive than before. But when I looked inside, the light of the Spirit was gone. They were going through the motions. They were singing the songs and reading the verses, but it was like watching actors in a play. There was no power, no healing, and no mercy. They had become just another social club, another place for people to hide from the world, rather than a place for them to be equipped to change it. They had kept the form of godliness, but they had rejected its heart. I saw people outside those churches, looking at the doors with a mix of anger and disappointment. They were searching for a drink of water, but all they found was a lecture. They were searching for a home, but all they found was a list of rules. I saw the tragedy of a world that was ready to be loved and a church that was too busy protecting its own interests to notice. The sorrow I felt from Jesus was so intense that I felt like my own spirit was breaking in two. He wasn't just showing me a possible future, he was showing me the logical conclusion of the way we are living right now. He was showing me that every time we choose a grudge over forgiveness, or a dollar over a person, we are adding another brick to that wall of gray fog. "Is there no hope, Lord?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He turned to me. And for the first time, a light began to shine through the gray. It wasn't the blinding light of the heavenly city, but a small, steady flame. "There is always hope," he said, and he reached out his hand as if to catch a falling star. "But the choice must be made in the heart of every single child. They must decide if they want to live in the shadows or if they are brave enough to step into the light of love." The vision of the gray world began to ripple and fade. I felt the urgency returning, the sense that time on earth was moving toward a great climax. "Matthew," Jesus said, his eyes locking onto mine with an authority that shook me to my core. "I am sending you back not just to tell a story, but to be a witness. You must tell them that the shadows are not inevitable. You must tell them that the heart of the Father is still open, and the invitation to the city of light is still there for anyone who will simply choose to love." I felt the pull again, that irresistible drawing away from his presence. I didn't want to go back to the gray world. I wanted to stay with him, in the warmth and the peace. But I knew that I had a task to do. I knew that those people in the houses, those workers at the desks, and those children behind the screens needed to know what I had seen. "Tell them," he said one last time, "that I am closer than their next breath, and my love is the only thing that will remain when the world of shadows passes away." The gray, suffocating fog of the world began to dissolve as Jesus led me further through the visions. Even though the things I had seen were heavy enough to crush a man's spirit, his hand in mine kept me from falling into despair. I realized then that my faith before this moment had been like a shallow puddle, but he was taking me into the depths of an ocean. I had spent my life as a preacher trying to explain him, but standing there, I felt like a man trying to describe the sun while holding a single candle. Meeting him was the most honest moment of my existence. There was no room for the pastor persona I had built. I was just a man, stripped bare, standing before the truth. He showed me a vision of the church again, but this time it was even more specific. I saw a group of leaders in a high-rise office building in the early weeks of 2026. They were looking at a large TV screen showing maps and numbers. They weren't talking about how to reach the lonely or feed the hungry. They were talking about their brand and how to protect their reputation from a scandal that was brewing. I saw the greed in their hearts. Not for money, though that was part of it, but for power. They wanted to be the loudest voice in the room. They had turned the message of the cross into a tool for their own influence. I saw how their pride trickled down into the pews. I saw a congregation divided down the middle because of a disagreement over who should lead a certain ministry. People who had taken communion together for 10 years were now calling each other names in the parking lot. They were using the Bible to justify their bitterness, throwing verses at each other like stones. It was a war of egos fought in the name of the Prince of Peace. "They are tearing my body apart," Jesus said, and his voice sounded like the cracking of a heart. "They believe they are defending me, but they are only defending their own shadows." Then, he showed me a vision of the beauty of heaven again, as a contrast to the fighting I had just witnessed. It was a glimpse of a great hall in the city of light. I saw people from every denomination, every culture, and every walk of life sitting at a table together. There was a man who had been a strict legalist on earth, sitting next to a woman who had spent her life in the gutter before finding grace. They were laughing together, their faces shining with a light that came from within. They weren't arguing about who was right. They were simply marveling at the fact that they were loved. The beauty of that reconciliation was more stunning than the golden streets. I saw that in heaven, the only thing that mattered was the love they had allowed to flow through them while they were on earth. All the titles, the degrees, and the correct opinions had burned away, leaving only the gold of their characters. I felt an incredible longing to see the church on earth look like that table. I realized that our divisions are just smoke that will vanish in the light of his face. The vision shifted once more to the general suffering of the world. I saw a young man in a crowded city surrounded by millions of people, yet he was so lonely that he could barely breathe. He was looking at his phone, watching videos of people arguing about politics and religion, and he felt like there was no place for him in such a loud, angry world. He felt like a mistake. I saw him walk to the edge of a bridge, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. In that moment, I felt Jesus' heart skip a beat. It was a physical sensation of pure, agonizing love for that one young man. I saw that to Jesus, that one boy was worth more than all the kingdoms and all the brands in the world. He wasn't a statistic, he was a son. Tell them that no one is a mistake, Jesus said, and his authority was like a mountain. Tell them that my love is the only thing that can bridge the gap between their loneliness and my home. I saw a woman in a hospital bed, dying alone because her family was too busy fighting over her inheritance to sit by her side. I saw the greed that had poisoned their blood, making them value paper and ink over the breath of their own mother. I saw the sorrow of the woman as she realized that the things she had spent her life accumulating meant nothing now that she was at the finish line. She was reaching out for a hand to hold, but all she found was the cold metal of the bed rail. "This is the suffering of a world that has forgotten the heart," Jesus whispered. I felt a wave of honesty wash over me as I looked at these visions. I realized that as a preacher, I had often been part of the problem. I had focused on the crowd and the message and the success, but I had missed the individual heart. I had talked about love in a general way, but I hadn't always lived it in the specific way. I felt a deep, burning desire to go back and just hold that woman's hand. I wanted to go to that bridge and tell that young man he was loved. I wanted to tell the fighting church members to just look at each other and see the image of God. Jesus looked at me and I saw that he knew my thoughts. He wasn't condemning me for my past failures. He was inviting me into a new way of being. He was showing me that the mission wasn't about being a great man, but about being a servant of the great love. The urgency returned, and the heavenly light began to swirl around us. I felt the weight of my mission settling onto my shoulders. It wasn't a burden of, I have to do this, but a fire of, I must do this. I knew that my time in his presence was coming to an end, and that the return to the physical world was near. "Matthew," he said, and his voice was a gentle, comforting embrace. "You have seen the beauty and you have seen the brokenness. Now you must choose to be the bridge." I felt the pull of the earth again, the sudden heavy gravity of my 34-year-old body waiting for me on that stage. The light of heaven was fading, but the warmth of his hands stayed on mine until the very last second. The last thing I felt from Jesus was a sense of peace so profound it made the golden streets of the heavenly city seem almost secondary. It was his heart that I wanted to stay near. But as the light began to stretch and warp, I felt a physical sensation of falling. It wasn't a gentle descent. It felt like being dropped from a great height back into a suit of lead. I felt the air grow heavy, the temperature drop, and then a sudden, violent slam. I gasped, my lungs burning as they fought to pull in the thick, sterile air of a hospital room. The pain in my chest was back, but it was different now. It was the ache of a body that had been brought back from the brink. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, the fluorescent lights of the ICU were blinding. I couldn't see the golden city. I couldn't see the rolling green meadows. I saw white tiles, plastic tubes, and the worried face of a nurse who let out a small cry when she saw me move. "He's awake! Matthew is awake!" she shouted, and suddenly the room was a blur of activity. I felt like an alien in my own skin. My 34-year-old body, which I used to think was so strong and capable, felt like a fragile, broken toy. I could hear the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, a sound that seemed so small and mechanical compared to the melody of heaven. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw and dry. I wanted to tell them to stop the noise, to listen to the silence I had just come from. But most of all, I wanted to tell them about him. The doctors called it a medical anomaly. They used words like spontaneous recovery and talked about the efficiency of the CPR team. They said my heart had stopped for a total of 10 minutes on that stage. In the medical world, 10 minutes without a heartbeat usually means a different kind of ending, or at least a life of severe brain damage. But I was clear, my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I looked at the doctor as he explained the luck of my survival, and I felt a deep, quiet urge to smile. It wasn't luck, it was a mission. When they finally let my wife, Lily, into the room, she looked like she had aged 10 years in a single night. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she gripped my hand so tightly I thought she might never let go. Behind her were our two children, looking small and frightened in the doorway of the hospital room. On Earth, this was my world. These were the people I loved most. But as I looked at them, I saw them through the lens of the vision Jesus had shown me. I didn't just see my wife. I saw a soul that was weary from trying to be the perfect pastor's wife. I saw my children as two little spirits who were being raised in a world of shadows, and my heart broke for them in a way it never had before. I saw him, Lily, I whispered, my voice cracking. She started to cry again, nodding her head, probably thinking I was just caught in the middle of a drug-induced dream. I know, honey. We were all praying. God is so good. No, I said, trying to sit up despite the tubes pulling at my arms. You don't understand. I didn't just feel him. I was with him. He showed me everything. Over the next few days, as I recovered, I told them the story. I told them about the mother in the basement, the man on the bridge, and the dark web of lines covering the earth. I told them about the city of light and the table where everyone had a seat. I saw the look in my son's eyes, a mix of relief that I was alive and a deep, unsettling confusion. He was only 10, and he didn't have a place in his mind for a father who had come back from the dead with a warning. My fellow church leaders came to visit too. They brought cards and fruit baskets, and they talked about how the video of my collapse had gone viral. They were already planning the homecoming service, talking about how we could use this miracle to grow the church's reach. They were thinking about the brand, the numbers, and the influence. I sat there in my hospital gown, feeling a cold shiver run down my spine. I saw them exactly as Jesus had shown them to me in the high-rise office. They were good people, but they were lost in the fog. We shouldn't talk about the church growth right now, I told them, interrupting a conversation about social media strategy. We should talk about why I was sent back. We should talk about the fact that we are failing to love the people right in front of us. The room went silent. They looked at each other with that polite, concerned expression people use when they think someone has had a mental break. One of them patted my leg and told me I just needed more rest. But I knew that the old Matthew, the one who cared about the brand and the lights, had died on that stage on February 10th. The man sitting in this bed was someone new. When I was finally discharged and went home, the world felt different. Every tree looked more vibrant, yet every person I saw on the street looked more burdened. I could almost see the gray fog clinging to them. I spent hours sitting in my backyard, staring at the sky, trying to hold on to the memory of the heavenly air. I felt a desperate urgency. Jesus had said the shadows were growing long, and I was sitting in a comfortable house while the world was walking toward a cliff. The following Sunday, against the advice of my doctors, I went back to the church. I didn't want a big production. I didn't want the lights or the flashy graphics on the TV screen. I walked out onto that stage, the same spot where my heart had stopped just days before. The sanctuary was packed. People had heard I was going to speak, and they were looking for a show. They wanted a miracle man to tell them something that would make them feel safe. I stood behind the pulpit and looked out at them. I saw the faces I had known for years. I saw the wealth, the polished clothes, and the hidden walls. I saw the families who weren't speaking and the people who were judging the ones sitting next to them. I didn't start with a joke. I didn't use a polished hook. I died on this stage, I said, and the room became so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. And for 10 minutes, I saw the truth of who we are and who we were meant to be. I saw that our religion is often just a way for us to hide from the very love God is trying to give us. I told them about the visions. I told them about the sorrow in Jesus' eyes when he looked at our divisions and our greed. I told them that the blessings we were always praying for were nothing compared to the joy of serving the least of these. I watched their faces. Some people were weeping, their hearts finally cracking open, but others looked angry. They looked like I was attacking their comfort, and in a way, I was. If we don't change, I told them, my voice echoing in the large room, we are just building a tomb with a cross on top. We are running out of time to be the heart of Christ to a world that is dying of loneliness. That service lasted for 4 hours. People didn't leave. They came to the front, not to be seen, but to confess. I saw two men who hadn't spoken in 5 years embrace each other. I saw a woman take off an expensive piece of jewelry and give it to a person she knew was struggling to pay rent. The shift had begun, but I knew the church was just the beginning. The world was much bigger and the shadows were much deeper. As I stood there, exhausted but more alive than I had ever been, I felt that steady, warm presence of Jesus right beside me. He wasn't on a screen or in a book. He was there, in the middle of the broken, messy, honest love that was finally starting to flow. But I knew there was more to say. The message wasn't just for the people in the pews. It was for the man on the bridge and the mother in the basement. It was for everyone. The days following that service in the middle of February were a blur of transformation and resistance. I realized quickly that coming back from the brink of death didn't make me a hero in everyone's eyes. It made me a servant with a very loud alarm clock. People didn't always want to be woken up. I started seeing the world as a place where every interaction was a chance to either add to the gray fog of the world or bring a spark of that heavenly light. I began to spend my time in the places I used to avoid, the small, crowded shelters, the quiet corners of the city where people feel forgotten, and the homes of those who had been deeply hurt by the very church I led. I realized that my 34 years before the accident were just a rehearsal for the real life that started when my heart stopped on that stage. The world I see now, in these days following February 10th, is a world standing on a razor's edge. I can still feel the weight of Jesus' hand on mine, and I can still hear the sorrow in his voice when he spoke of the suffering that is coming if we do not change. He showed me the wars that are fueled by nothing but pride, the hunger that is allowed to exist simply because of greed, and the church that is paralyzed by its own divisions. He showed me that we have all the tools to fix these things, but we lack the heart. We are trying to solve spiritual problems with money, politics, and machines, and it is failing us. The suffering isn't some mystery. It is the natural result of turning our backs on the only thing that matters. But I also carry the memory of the city of light. I remember the smell of the air that was made of life and the sound of laughter that had no hidden pain behind it. That world is not just a dream for after we die. It is a reality that we are supposed to be bringing here, one choice at a time. Every time we choose to forgive someone who doesn't deserve it, every time we share what we have with someone who has nothing, and every time we look at someone we've been told to hate and see a brother instead, we are tearing a hole in that gray fog. We are showing the world that there is a different way to be human. I realize now that the suffering Jesus warned me about isn't a bolt of lightning from the sky. It is simply what happens when we finally get what we've been asking for, a world without him, a world without the heart. We are standing at that crossroads right now. One way leads back to the city of light, and the other leads into a cold, dark isolation. The choice isn't up to the leaders or the governments or the people with the most followers. It is up to you in the quiet moments of your own day. It is in how you treat the person who bothers you, how you handle your money, and how you speak to those who disagree with you. Jesus' tone when he sent me back wasn't one of anger, but of a deep, comforting urgency. He wants his children to come home, but he wants us to bring as much of heaven as we can back to earth while we are still here. He is a gentle, guiding presence, but he is also the king who knows that the clock is ticking. He showed me that the beauty of heaven is mirrored every time we choose love over our own pride. He showed me that the church isn't a building or a brand. It is the people who are willing to be broken so that others can be made whole. And now I plead with you, whoever you are, wherever you are, do not wait until it is too late. Do not waste another day believing that love is something you can afford to put off. Do not hold on to bitterness, to anger, to division. Do not let the world convince you that power, pride, or revenge is more valuable than the simple act of choosing to love. You are running out of time. The world is running out of time. The kingdom of heaven is real. I have seen it, and I promise you, it is more beautiful, more wonderful, more perfect than anything you could ever imagine. But the choice to live for it, to bring that love into this world, to reflect that love in your own life, that choice is yours to make. Jesus' love is the answer to every broken thing, every hurt, every lost soul, and he has given every single person the ability to carry that love forward. The only love, will you? The only question is, will you? Because this is not just my mission, it is yours, it is ours. Every single one of us has a role to play in what happens next. Every single one of us has the power to choose love over hate, mercy over judgment, peace over division. Every single one of us is chosen to make a difference. I do not know what comes next. I do not know how much time is left, but I do know one thing. Jesus has already given us the answer, and his last words to me, the words that have echoed in my heart every day since I returned, the words that I now leave with you are the only ones that truly matter. Love one another as I have loved you. If this message touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to hear more about what Jesus revealed, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching, and remember, love one another just as he has loved us.